Independent of experience, a fixed action pattern is not learned. 3. This is known as a fixed action pattern is complete upon the very first release. 3. Sign stimulus. The sign stimulus, also known as key stimulus or releaser, is the determining feature of a stimulus that produces a response. Sign stimuli are often found when observing a fixed action pattern, FAP, that is an innate behavior with very little variance in the manner in which the actions are executed. Several examples of sign stimuli can be seen through the observation of animal behavior in their natural environment. Experimenters have gone into these natural environments to better assess the stimuli and determine the key features of them that elicit a fixed action pattern. Scientists have also observed direct exploitation of sign stimuli in nature among different species of birds. Fixed action patterns are released due to certain external stimuli. 1. These stimuli are single or a small group of attributes of an object, not the object as a whole. 9. These attributes may include color, shape, odor, and sound. 1, 2. Exaggerated models of these attributes are called supernormal stimuli. 10. A supernormal stimulus leads to an exaggerated response. 10. Supernormal stimuli are more effective at releasing a response than a natural stimulus. 10. An external stimulus that elicits a fixed action pattern is termed a sign stimulus if the stimuli emanates from the environment. 9. Whereas a releaser emanates from one's own species. 9. Supernormal stimuli. When conducting further experiments, scientists came across the idea of supernormal stimuli. Nicolaas Tinbergen found that incubating geese, when given the choice between performing the egg rolling FAP with an egg versus a full-sized volleyball, they chose the volleyball. These supernormal stimuli, although not naturally occurring, gave insight into the process of natural selection and how it may be that some stimulus features such as the size of the egg result in an increased ability to trigger a FAP. 11. Examples. Male stickleback mating behavior. A three-spined stickleback like those used in Tinbergen's experiments. One example of fixed action patterns is the courtship and aggression behaviors of the male stickleback, particularly the three-spined stickleback, during mating season, described in a series of studies by Nico Tinbergen. 4.12 During the spring mating season, male stickleback's ventrum turns red and they establish a territory to build a nest. 4. They attack other male sticklebacks that enter their territory, but court females and entice them to enter the nest to lay their eggs. 4. Tinbergen used models of sticklebacks to investigate which features of male and female sticklebacks elicited attack and courtship behavior from male sticklebacks. 4. Tinbergen's main findings were that male sticklebacks responded in a relatively invariant way and attacked even the most crude of models with a red belly, but in contrast, courted a model with a swollen belly. 4. He also found that when presented with both a real male stickleback and a crude model, if the model's stomach was more red, the stickleback would attack the model as opposed to the other real male stickleback. 4. Grey-lag goose egg retrieval behavior. A grey-lag goose which participates in the described egg retrieval behavior. Another example of a behavior that has been described as a fixed action pattern is the egg retrieval behavior of the grey-lag goose, reported in classic studies by Nico Tinbergen and Konrad Lorenz. 5. Like many ground nesting birds, if an egg becomes displaced from the nest, the grey-lag rolls it back to the nest with its beak. 5. 11. 13. The site of the displaced egg is the sign stimulus and elicits the egg retrieval behavior. 5. First, the goose fixates its sight on the egg. 5. Next, it extends its neck over the egg. 5. Finally, it rolls the egg back to the nest using the underside of its beak. 5. If the egg is removed from the goose during the performance of egg rolling, the bird will continue with the behavior, pulling its head back as if an imaginary egg is still being maneuvered. 5. It has been shown that the greylag will also attempt to retrieve other egg-shaped objects, such as a golf ball, doorknob, or even a model egg too large to have possibly been laid by the goose itself, i.e. a supernormal stimulus. 14. The sight of the egg outside of the nest serves as the stimulus in this particular instance because it is only after the recognition of the egg's displacement that the fixed action pattern occurs. 11.15 The manipulation of the sign stimulus through a series of experiments can allow scientists to understand what specific component of the stimulus is responsible for the innate behavioral sequence. If the egg were to be picked up and taken away after it is displaced from the nest, the goose still exhibits the same head-moving motion even though there is no egg present. 11. This was put to the test by using objects such as beer cans and baseballs. Experimenters found that the stimulus merely had to be an object that was large enough in size, convex enough in shape, and comfortable enough for the goose to lay its neck around the edges of the object. 11. These features that the stimulus has to obtain in order to trigger a resulting FAP were then given the official term of sign stimuli. Scientists came to the realization that there must be an innate deciphering method that the goose goes through in order to determine a suitable sign stimulus. This was defined as an innate releasing mechanism, IRM. The goose's IRM when put to the test in the natural world not being manipulated by scientific experimentation is almost always efficient in getting the desired item of an egg back into the nest. 11. Other examples of sign stimuli. More examples of sign stimuli include the red mark on an adult's beak recognized by the chicks of various gull species. Light polarization patterns recognized by mayflies when they are deciding where to drop their eggs. The presence of a female sage grouse that causes males to exhibit a strut pattern display in order to attract the female during breeding season. 16. Evolutionary advantages. Most behaviors which are both fixed action patterns and occur in more complex animals, are usually essential to the animal's fitness, or in which speed, i.e. an absence of learning, is a factor. 6. For instance, the grey-lag goose's egg retrieval behavior is so essential to the survival of its chicks that the fitness of the parent bird is increased by the behavior being relatively invariant. 5. A stickleback will attack any male fish who enters his territory while the female is sexually receptive, reacting to their red color, while the female stickleback triggers behavior in the male resulting in the fertilization of her eggs. 4. Evolutionary disadvantages. Brood parasites, such as the cuckoo, provide a supernormal stimulus to the parenting species, in this case a common reed warbler. Fixed action patterns are predictable, as they are invariable, and therefore can lead to exploitation. Some species have evolved to exploit the fixed action patterns of other species by mimicry of their sign stimuli. 7. Replicating the releaser required to trigger a fixed action pattern is known as code breaking. 17. A well-known example of this is brood parasitism, where one species will lay its eggs in the nest of another species, which will then parent its young. 7. A young North American cowbird, for example, provides a supernormal stimulus to its foster parent, which will cause it to forage rapidly to satisfy the larger bird's demands. 18. A nestling will provide higher levels of stimulus with noisier, more energetic behavior, communicating its urgent need for food. 18. Parents in this situation have to work harder to provide food, otherwise their own offspring are likely to die of starvation. 18. Brood parasitism. The exploitation of sign stimuli can be seen when exploring the concept of brood parasitism. Other animals will learn the sign stimuli of different species and use it to manipulate the other animal into doing something for its own benefit. An example of this can be seen in the European cuckoo. This particular species of bird benefits by handing off the task of raising their young to other species of birds who will care for any egg that is found in its nest. In this case, the sign stimulus is the presence of the eggs in the nest. If the other bird does not recognize the other bird's egg as foreign, it will continue on caring for it as its own by incubating it and hatching it. Once it is hatched, the young cuckoo ensures for itself a solid upbringing by instinctively pushing its neck around anything that is solid in the nest and pushing it over the edge, thus classifying the sign stimulus as any solid object. This allows for the cuckoo's unwitting foster parents to have plenty of time to devote to caring for it without any other distractions. 19. Exceptions. There are 4 exceptions to fixed action pattern rules. 8. These include reduced response threshold, vacuum activity, displacement behavior, and graded response. 8. Reduced response threshold. Fixed action patterns become easier to release as time increases between the last release. 8. Vacuum activity. After so long without being released, fixed action patterns are released in the absence of the sign stimulus or releaser. 20. Vacuum activity is demonstrated in courtship behavior of ring doves. 21. 22. Male blonde ring doves isolated from their own species will resort to courting a pigeon, then a human's hand, and finally expressing courtship activity alone in their box, if they are left alone for a long period of time. 21. 22. Displacement behavior. Fixed action patterns may be performed that are irrelevant to the stimulus present. 23. This can be seen in sticklebacks. 23. Displacement behavior occurs when the fighting and mating urges are frustrated. 23. A male stickleback chasing another male stickleback stops where their two territories meet and dives to the bottom of the tank, picking something up. 23. This behavior resembles that of nest digging during mating season, but is not released by the proper sign stimulus. 23. Graded response. Fixed action patterns may vary in intensity instead of being triggered. 8. References. 1. Paez Rondon, Oscar, Aldana, Ellis, Dickens, Joseph, Odalora Luna, Fernando, May 2018. Ethological description of a fixed action. Five. Next, it extends its neck over the egg. 5. Finally, it rolls the egg back to the nest using the underside of its beak. 5. If the egg is removed from the goose during the performance of egg rolling, the bird will continue with the behavior, pulling its head back as if an imaginary egg is still being maneuvered. 5. It has been shown that the greylag will also attempt to retrieve other egg-shaped objects, such as a golf ball, doorknob, or even a model egg too large to have possibly been laid by the goose itself, i.e. a supernormal stimulus. 14. The sight of the egg outside of the nest serves as the stimulus in this particular instance because it is only after the recognition of the egg's displacement that the fixed action pattern occurs. 11. 15. The manipulation of the sign stimulus through a series of experiments can allow scientists to understand what specific component of the stimulus is responsible the innate behavioral sequence. If the egg were to be picked up and taken away after it is displaced from the nest, the goose still exhibits the same head-moving motion even though there is no egg present. 11. This was put to the test by using objects such as beer cans and baseballs. Experimenters found that the stimulus merely had to be an object that was large enough in size, convex enough in shape, and comfortable enough for the goose to lay its neck around the edges of the object. 11. These features that the stimulus has to obtain in order to trigger a resulting FAP were then given the official term of sign stimuli. Scientists came to the realization that there must be an innate deciphering method that the goose goes through in order to determine a suitable sign stimulus. This was defined as an innate releasing mechanism, IRM. The goose's IRM when put to the test in the natural world not being manipulated by scientific experimentation is almost always efficient in getting the desired item of an egg back into the nest. 11. Other examples of sign stimuli. More examples of sign stimuli include the red mark on an adult's beak recognized by the chicks of various gull species. Light polarization patterns recognized by mayflies when they are deciding where to drop their eggs. The presence of a female sage grouse that causes males to exhibit a strut pattern display in order to attract the female during breeding season. 16. Evolutionary advantages. Most behaviors which are both fixed action patterns and occur in more complex animals, are usually essential to the animal's fitness, or in which speed, i.e. an absence of learning, is a factor. 6. For instance, the greylag goose's egg retrieval behavior is so essential to the survival of its chicks that the fitness of the parent bird is increased by the behavior being relatively invariant. 5. A stickleback will attack any male fish who enters his territory while the female is sexually receptive, reacting to their red color, while the female stickleback triggers behavior in the male resulting in the fertilization of her eggs. 4. Evolutionary disadvantages. Brood parasites, such as the cuckoo, provide a supernormal stimulus to the parenting species, in this case a common reed warbler. Fixed action patterns are predictable, as they are invariable, and therefore can lead to exploitation. Some species have evolved to exploit the fixed action patterns of other species by mimicry of their sign stimuli. 7. Replicating the releaser required to trigger a fixed action pattern is known as code breaking. 17. A well-known example of this is brood parasitism, where one species will lay its eggs in the nest of another species, which will then parent its young. 7. A young North American cowbird, for example, provides a supernormal stimulus to its foster parent, which will cause it to forage rapidly to satisfy the larger bird's demands. 18. A nestling will provide higher levels of stimulus with noisier, more energetic behavior, communicating its urgent need for food. 18. Parents in this situation have to work harder to provide food, otherwise their own offspring are likely to die of starvation. 18. Brood parasitism. The exploitation of sign stimuli can be seen when exploring the concept of brood parasitism. Other animals will learn the sign stimuli of different species and use it to manipulate the other animal into doing something for its own benefit. An example of this can be seen in the European cuckoo. This particular species of bird benefits by handing off the task of raising their young to other species of birds who will care for any egg that is found in its nest. In this case, the sign stimulus is the presence of the eggs in the nest. If the other bird does not recognize the other bird's egg as foreign, it will continue on caring for it as its own by incubating it and hatching it. Once it is hatched, the young cuckoo ensures for itself a solid upbringing by instinctively pushing its neck around anything that is solid in the nest and pushing it over the edge, thus classifying the sign stimulus as any solid object. This allows for the cuckoo's unwitting foster parents to have plenty of time to devote to caring for it without any other distractions. 19. Exceptions. There are 4 exceptions to fixed action pattern rules. 8. These include reduced response threshold, vacuum activity, displacement behavior, and graded response. 8. Reduced response threshold. Fixed action patterns become easier to release as time increases between the last release. 8. Vacuum activity. After so long without being released, fixed action patterns are released in the absence of the sign stimulus or releaser. 20. Vacuum activity is demonstrated in courtship behavior of ring doves. 21. 22. Male blonde ring doves isolated from their own species will resort to courting a pigeon, then a human's hand, and finally expressing courtship activity alone in their box, if they are left alone for a long period of time. 21. 22. Displacement behavior. Fixed action patterns may be performed that are irrelevant to the stimulus present. 23. This can be seen in sticklebacks. 23. Displacement behavior occurs when the fighting and mating urges are frustrated. 23. A male stickleback chasing another male stickleback stops where their two territories meet and dives to the bottom of the tank, picking something up. 23. This behavior resembles that of nest digging during mating season, but is not released by the proper sign stimulus. 23. Graded response. Fixed action patterns may vary in intensity instead of being triggered. 8. References. 1. Paez Rondon, Oscar, Aldana, Ellis, Dickens, Joseph, Odalora Luna, Fernando, May 2018. Ethological description of a fixed action pattern in a kissing bug, Triatomine, vision, gestation, proboscis extension and drinking of water and guava, 1016401805447Y. Journal of Ethology, 36 107-116. doi, 10.1007 per second 1016401805447YH. 2. Ronacher, Bernhard, February 2019. Innate releasing mechanisms and fixed action patterns, basic ethological concepts as drivers for neuroethological studies on acoustic communication in Orthoptera. Journal of Comparative Physiology A205 133-50. doi, 10.1007 per second 00359-018-01311-3 0.1007% 2F00359-018-01311-3. PMC 6394777 SPMC 6394777. PMID 30617601. 3. Studying Animal Behavior, Autobiographies of the Founders. Dewsbury, Donald A. Chicago, University of Chicago Press. 1989, ISBN 0226144100. OCLC 19670401 t.org/OCLC/196704001 closing parenthesis. 4. Tinbergen, End 1952. The Curious Behavior of the Stickleback. Scientific American, 187, 622-27. Bibcode, 1952 SciAm.187F, 22T2T. doi, 10.1038, Scientific American 1252-22, 252-22. JSTOR 24944080. Fixed action pattern. Evolutionary advantages. Most behaviors which are both fixed action patterns and occur in more complex animals are usually essential to the animal's fitness, or in which speed, i.e. an absence of learning, is a factor. 6. For instance, the greylag goose's egg retrieval behavior is so essential to the survival of its chicks that the fitness of the parent bird is increased by the behavior being relatively invariant. 5. A stickleback will attack any male fish who enters his territory while the female is sexually receptive, reacting to their red color, while the female stickleback triggers behavior in the male resulting in the fertilization of her eggs. 4. Evolutionary disadvantages. Brood parasites, such as the cuckoo, provide a supernormal stimulus to the parenting species, in this case a common reed warbler. Fixed action patterns are predictable, as they are invariable, and therefore can lead to exploitation. Some species have evolved to exploit the fixed action patterns of other species by mimicry of their sign stimuli. 7. Replicating the releaser required to trigger a fixed action pattern is known as code breaking. 17. A well-known example of this is brood parasitism, where one species will lay its eggs in the nest of another species, which will then parent its young. 7. A young North American cowbird, for example, provides a supernormal stimulus to its foster parent, which will cause it to forage rapidly to satisfy the larger bird's demands. 18. A nestling will provide higher levels of stimulus with noisier, more energetic behavior, communicating its urgent need for food. 18. Parents in this situation have to work harder to provide food, otherwise their own offspring are likely to die of starvation. 18. Brood parasitism. The exploitation of sign stimuli can be seen when exploring the concept of brood parasitism. Other animals will learn the sign stimuli of different species and use it to manipulate the other animal into doing something for its own benefit. An example of this can be seen in the European cuckoo. This particular species of bird benefits by handing off the task of raising their young to other species of birds who will care for any egg that is found in its nest. In this case, the sign stimulus is the presence of the eggs in the nest. If the other bird does not recognize the other bird's egg as foreign, it will continue on caring for it as its own by incubating it and hatching it. Once it is hatched, the young cuckoo ensures for itself a solid upbringing by instinctively pushing its neck around anything that is solid in the nest and pushing it over the edge, thus classifying the sign stimulus as any solid object. This allows for the cuckoo's unwitting foster parents to have plenty of time to devote to caring for it without any other distractions. 19. Exceptions. There are 4 exceptions to fixed action pattern rules. 8. These include reduced response threshold, vacuum activity, displacement behavior, and graded response. 8. Reduced response threshold. Fixed action patterns become easier to release as time increases between the last release. 8. Vacuum activity. After so long without being released, fixed action patterns are released in the absence of the sign stimulus or releaser. 20. Vacuum activity is demonstrated in courtship behavior of ring doves. 21. 22. Male blonde ring doves isolated from their own species will resort to courting a pigeon, then a human's hand, and finally expressing courtship activity alone in their box, if they are left alone for a long period of time. 21. 22. Displacement behavior. Fixed action patterns may be performed that are irrelevant to the stimulus present. 23. This can be seen in sticklebacks. 23. Displacement behavior occurs when the fighting and mating urges are frustrated. 23. A male stickleback chasing another male stickleback stops where their two territories meet and dives to the bottom of the tank, picking something up. 23. This behavior resembles that of nest digging during mating season, but is not released by the proper sign stimulus. 23. This behavior resembles that of nest digging during mating season, but is not released by the proper sign stimulus. 23. Graded response. Fixed action patterns may vary in intensity instead of being triggered. Learning. Learning is the process of acquiring new understanding, knowledge, behaviors, skills, values, attitudes, and preferences. 1. The ability to learn is possessed by humans, non-human animals, and some machines. There is also evidence for some kind of learning in certain plants. 2. Some learning is immediate, induced by a single event, e.g. being burned by a hot stove, but much skill and knowledge accumulate from repeated experiences. 3. The changes induced by learning often last a lifetime, and it is hard to distinguish learned material that seems to be lost from that which cannot be retrieved. 4. American students learning how to make and roll sushi. Human learning starts at birth, it might even start before 5 and continues until death as a consequence of ongoing interactions between people and their environment. The nature and processes involved in learning are studied in many established fields, including educational psychology, neuropsychology, experimental psychology, cognitive sciences, and pedagogy, as well as emerging fields of knowledge, e.g. with a shared interest in the topic of learning from safety events such as incidents, accidents. 6. Or in collaborative learning health systems. 7. Research in such fields has led to the identification of various sorts of learning. For example, learning may occur as a result of habituation, or classical conditioning, operant conditioning, or as a result of more complex activities such as play, seen only in relatively intelligent animals. 8. 9. Learning may occur consciously or without conscious awareness. Learning that an aversive event cannot be avoided or escaped may result in a condition called learned helplessness. 10. There is evidence for human behavioral learning prenatally, in which habituation has been observed as early as 32 weeks into gestation, indicating that the central nervous system is sufficiently developed and primed for learning and memory to occur very early on in development. 11. Play has been approached by several theorists as a form of learning. Children experiment with the world, learn the rules, and learn to interact through play. Lev Vygotsky agrees that play is pivotal for children's development, since they make meaning of their environment through playing educational games. For Vygotsky, however, play is the first form of learning language and communication, and the stage where a child begins to understand rules and symbols. 12. This has led to a view that learning in organisms is always related to semiosis. 13. And is often associated with representational systems activity. 14. Types. There are various functional categorizations of memory which have developed. Some memory researchers distinguish memory based on the relationship between the stimuli involved, associative versus non-associative, or based to whether the content can be communicated through language, declarative, explicit versus procedural, implicit. Some of these categories can, in turn, be parsed into subtypes. For instance, declarative memory comprises both episodic and semantic memory. Non-associative learning. Non-associative learning refers to a relatively permanent change in the strength of response to a single stimulus due to repeated exposure to that stimulus. 15. This definition exempts the changes caused by sensory adaptation, fatigue, or injury. 16. Non-associative learning can be divided into habituation and sensitization. Habituation. Habituation is an example of non-associative learning in which one or more components of an innate response, e.g., response probability, response duration, to a stimulus diminishes when the stimulus is repeated. Thus, habituation must be distinguished from extinction, which is an associative process. In operant extinction, for example, a response declines because it is no longer followed by a reward. An example of habituation can be seen in small songbirds. If a stuffed owl or similar predator is put into the cage, the birds initially react to it as though it were a real predator. Soon the birds react less, showing habituation. If another stuffed owl is introduced or the same one removed and reintroduced, the birds react to it again as though it were a predator, demonstrating that it is only a very specific stimulus that is habituated to, namely, one particular unmoving owl in one place. The habituation process is faster for stimuli that occur at a high rather than for stimuli that occur at a low rate, as well as for the weak and strong stimuli, respectively. 17. Habituation has been shown in essentially every species of animal, as well as the sensitive plant. Mimosa pudica, 18, and the large protozoan Stender ceruleus. 19. This concept acts in direct opposition to sensitization. 17. Sensitization. Sensitization is an example of non-associative learning in which the progressive amplification of a response follows repeated administrations of a stimulus. 20. This is based on the notion that a defensive reflex to a stimulus such as withdrawal or escape becomes stronger after the exposure to a different harmful or threatening stimulus. 21. An everyday example of this mechanism is the repeated tonic stimulation of peripheral nerves that occurs if a person rubs their arm continuously. After a while, this stimulation creates a warm sensation that can eventually turn painful. This pain results from a progressively amplified synaptic response of the peripheral nerves. This sends a warning that the stimulation is harmful. 22. Sensitization is thought to underlie both adaptive as well as maladaptive learning processes in the organism. 23. Active learning. Active learning occurs when a person takes control of his/her learning experience. Since understanding information is a key aspect of learning, it is important for learners to recognize what they understand and what they do not. By doing so, they can monitor their own mastery of subjects. Active learning encourages learners to have an internal dialogue in which they verbalize understandings. This and other metacognitive strategies can be taught to a child over time. Studies within metacognition have proven the value in active learning, claiming that the learning is usually at a stronger level as a result. 24. In addition, learners have more incentive to learn when they have control over not only how they learn but also what they learn. 25. Active learning is a key characteristic of student-centered learning. Conversely, passive learning and direct instruction are characteristics of teacher-centered learning or traditional education. Associative learning. Associative learning is the process by which a person or animal learns an association between two stimuli or events. 26. In classical conditioning, a previously neutral stimulus is repeatedly paired with a reflex-eliciting stimulus until eventually the neutral stimulus elicits a response on its own. In operant conditioning, a behavior that is reinforced or punished in the presence of a stimulus becomes more or less likely to occur in the presence of that stimulus. Operant conditioning. Operant conditioning is a way in which behavior can be shaped or modified according to the desires of the trainer or head individual. Operant conditioning uses the thought that living things seek pleasure and avoid pain, and that an animal or human can learn through receiving either reward or punishment at a specific time, called trace conditioning. Trace conditioning is the small and ideal period of time between the subject performing the desired behavior and receiving the positive reinforcement as a result of their performance. The reward needs to be given immediately after the completion of the wanted behavior. 27. Operant conditioning is different from classical conditioning in that it shapes behavior not solely on bodily reflexes that occur naturally to a specific stimulus, but rather focuses on the shaping of wanted behavior that requires conscious thought, and ultimately requires learning. 28. Punishment and reinforcement are the two principal ways in which operant conditioning occurs. Punishment is used to reduce unwanted behavior, and ultimately, from the learner's perspective, leads to avoidance of the punishment, not necessarily avoidance of the unwanted behavior. Punishment is not an appropriate way to increase wanted behavior for animals or humans. Punishment can be divided into two subcategories: positive punishment and negative punishment. Positive punishment is when an aversive aspect of life or thing is added to the subject. For this reason it is called positive punishment. For example, the parent spanking their child would be considered a positive punishment, because a spanking was added to the child. Negative punishment is considered the removal of something loved or desirable from the subject. For example, when a parent puts his child in timeout, in reality, the child is losing the opportunity to be with friends, or to enjoy the freedom to do as he pleases. In this example, negative punishment is the removal of the child's desired rights to play with his friends, etc. 29, 30. Reinforcement, on the other hand, is used to increase a wanted behavior either through negative reinforcement or positive reinforcement. Negative reinforcement is defined by removing an undesirable aspect of life, or thing. For example, a dog might learn to sit as the trainer scratches his ears, which ultimately is removing his itch's undesirable aspect. Positive reinforcement is defined by adding a desirable aspect of life or thing. For example, a dog might learn to sit if he receives a treat. In this example, the treat was added to the dog's life. 29-30. Classical conditioning. The typical paradigm for classical conditioning involves repeatedly pairing an unconditioned stimulus, which unfailingly evokes a reflexive response, with another previously neutral stimulus, which does not normally evoke a response. Following conditioning, the response occurs both to the unconditioned stimulus and to the other, unrelated stimulus, now referred to as a conditioned stimulus. The response to the conditioned stimulus is termed a conditioned response. The classic example is Ivan Pavlov and his dogs. 21. Pavlov fed his dogs meat powder, which naturally made the dogs salivate. Salivating is a reflexive response to the meat powder. Meat powder is the unconditioned stimulus, US, and the salivation is the unconditioned response, UR. Pavlov rang a bell before presenting the meat powder. The first time Pavlov rang the bell, the neutral stimulus, the dogs did not salivate, but once he put the meat powder in their mouths they began to salivate. After numerous pairings of bell and food, the dogs learned that the bell signaled that food was about to come, and began to salivate when they heard the bell. Once this occurred, the bell became the conditioned stimulus, CS, and the salivation to the bell became the conditioned response, CR. Classical conditioning has been demonstrated in many species. For example, it is seen in honeybees, in the proboscis extension reflex paradigm. 31. It was recently also demonstrated in garden pea plants. 32. Another influential person in the world of classical conditioning is John B. Watson. Watson's work was very influential and paved the way for B.F. Skinner's radical behaviorism. Watson's behaviorism and philosophy of science stood in direct contrast to Freud and other accounts based largely on introspection. Watson's view was that the introspective method was too subjective and that we should limit the study of human development to directly observable behaviors. In 1913, Watson published the article, Psychology as the Behaviorist Views, in which he argued that laboratory studies should serve psychology best as a science. Watson's most famous, and controversial, experiment was Little Albert, where he demonstrated how psychologists can account for the learning of emotion through classical conditioning principles. Observational learning. Observational learning is learning that occurs through observing the behavior of others. It is a form of social learning which takes various forms, based on various processes. In humans, this form of learning seems to not need reinforcement to occur, but instead, requires a social model such as a parent, sibling, friend, or teacher with surroundings. Imprinting. Imprinting is a kind of learning occurring at a particular life stage that is rapid and apparently independent of the consequences of behavior. In filial imprinting, young animals, particularly birds, form an association with another individual or in some cases, an object, that they respond to as they would to a parent. In 1935, the Austrian zoologist Konrad Lorenz discovered that certain birds follow and form a bond if the object makes sounds. Play. Play generally describes behavior with no particular end in itself, but that improves performance in similar future situations. This is seen in a wide variety of vertebrates besides humans, but is mostly limited to mammals and birds. Cats are known to play with a ball of string when young, which gives them experience with catching prey. Besides inanimate objects, animals may play with other members of their own species or other animals, such as orcas playing with seals they have caught. Play involves a significant cost to animals, such as increased vulnerability to predators and the risk of injury and possibly infection. It also consumes energy, so there must be significant benefits associated with play for it to have evolved. Play is generally seen in younger animals, suggesting a link with learning. However, it may also have other benefits not associated directly with learning, for example improving physical fitness. Play, as it pertains to humans as a form of learning, is central to a child's learning and development. Through play, children learn social skills such as sharing and collaboration. Children develop emotional skills such as learning to deal with the emotion of anger, through play activities. As a form of learning, play also facilitates the development of thinking and language skills in children. 33. There are 5 types of play. 1. Sensorimotor play aka functional play, characterized by the repetition of an activity. 2. Role play occurs starting at the age of 3. 3. Rule-based play where authoritative prescribed codes of conduct are primary. 4. 4. Construction play involves experimentation and building. 5. Movement play aka physical play. 33. These 5 types of play are often intersecting. All types of play generate thinking and problem-solving skills in children. Children learn to think creatively when they learn through play. 34. Specific activities involved in each type of play change over time as humans progress through the lifespan. Play as a form of learning can occur solitarily or involve interacting with others. Enculturation. Enculturation is the process by which people learn values and behaviors that are appropriate or necessary in their surrounding culture. 35. Parents, other adults, and peers shape the individual's understanding of these values. 35. If successful, enculturation results in competence in the language, values, and rituals of the culture. 35. This is different from acculturation, where a person adopts the values and societal rules of a culture different from their native one. Multiple examples of enculturation can be found cross-culturally. Collaborative practices in the Mazahua people have shown that participation in everyday interaction and later learning activities contributed to enculturation rooted in nonverbal social experience. 36. As the children participated in everyday activities, they learned the cultural significance of these interactions. The collaborative and helpful behaviors exhibited by Mexican and Mexican heritage children is a cultural practice known as being ACO Medido. 37. Chilhuani girls in Peru describe themselves as weaving constantly, following behavior shown by the other adults. 38. Episodic learning. Episodic learning is a change in behavior that occurs as a result of an event. 39. For example, a fear of dogs that follows being bitten by a dog is episodic learning. Episodic learning is so named because events are recorded into episodic memory, which is one of the three forms of explicit learning and retrieval, along with perceptual memory and semantic memory. 40. Episodic memory remembers events in history that are embedded in experience, and this is distinguished from semantic memory, which attempts to extract facts out of their experiential context. 41. Or, as some describe, a timeless organization of knowledge. 42. For instance, if a person remembers the Grand Canyon from a recent visit, it is an episodic memory. He would use semantic memory to answer someone who would ask him information such as where the Grand Canyon is. A study revealed that humans are very accurate in the recognition of episodic memory even without deliberate intention to memorize it. 43. This is said to indicate a very large storage capacity of the brain for things that people pay attention to. 43. Multimedia learning. Multimedia learning is where a person uses both auditory and visual stimuli to learn information. 44. This type of learning relies on dual coding theory. 45. E-learning and augmented learning. Electronic learning or e-learning is computer-enhanced learning. A specific and always more diffused e-learning is mobile learning, m-learning, which uses different mobile telecommunication equipment, such as cellular phones. When a learner interacts with the e-learning environment, it is called augmented learning. By adapting to the needs of individuals, the context-driven instruction can be dynamically tailored to the learner's natural environment. Augmented digital content may include text, images, video, audio, music and voice. By personalizing instruction, augmented learning has been shown to improve learning performance for a lifetime. 46. See also minimally invasive education. Moore, 1989, 47 purported that three core types of interaction are necessary for quality, effective online learning. Learner-learner, i.e. communication between and among peers with or without the teacher present. Learner-instructor, i.e. student-teacher communication, and learner content, i.e. intellectually interacting with content that results in changes in learners' understanding, perceptions, and cognitive structures. In his theory of transactional distance, Moore, 1993, 48 contended that structure and interaction or dialogue bridge the gap in understanding and communication that is created by geographical distances, known as transactional distance. Rote learning. Rote learning is memorizing information so that it can be recalled by the learner exactly the way it was read or heard. The major technique used for rote learning is learning by repetition, based on the idea that a learner can recall the material exactly, but not its meaning, if the information is repeatedly processed. Rote learning is used in diverse areas, from mathematics to music to religion. Meaningful learning. Meaningful learning is the concept that learned knowledge, e.g., a fact, is fully understood to the extent that it relates to other knowledge. Meaningful learning is the concept that learned knowledge, e.g., a fact, is fully understood to the extent that it relates to other knowledge. To this end, meaningful learning contrasts with rote learning, in which information is acquired without regard to understanding. Meaningful learning, on the other hand, implies there is a comprehensive knowledge of the context of the facts learned. 49. Evidence-based learning. Evidence-based learning is the use of evidence from well-designed scientific studies to accelerate learning. Evidence-based learning methods such as spaced repetition can increase the rate at which a student learns. 50. Formal learning. A depiction of the world's oldest continually operating university, the University of Bologna, Italy. Formal learning is a deliberate way attaining of knowledge, which takes place within a teacher-student environment, such as in a school system or work environment. 51-52 The term formal learning has nothing to do with the formality of the learning, but rather the way it is directed and organized. In formal learning, the learning or training departments set out the goals and objectives of the learning, and oftentimes learners will be awarded with a diploma, or a type of formal recognition. 51-53 Non-formal learning. Non-formal learning is organized learning outside the formal learning system. For example, learning by coming together with people with similar interests and exchanging viewpoints, in clubs or in international youth organizations and workshops. From the organizer's point of reference, non-formal learning does not always need a main objective or learning outcome. From the learner's point of view, non-formal learning, although not focused on outcomes, often results in an intentional learning opportunity. 54. Informal learning. Informal learning is less structured than non-formal learning. It may occur through the experience of day-to-day situations. For example, one would learn to look ahead while walking because of the possible dangers inherent in not paying attention to where one is going. It is learning from life, during a meal at the table with parents, during play, and while exploring, etc. For the learner, informal learning is most often an experience of happenstance, and not a deliberately planned experience. Thus this does not require enrollment into any class. Unlike formal learning, informal learning typically does not lead to accreditation. 54 Informal learning begins to unfold as the learner ponders his or her situation. This type of learning does not require a professor of any kind, and learning outcomes are unforeseen following the learning experience. 55. Informal learning is self-directed, and because it focuses on day-to-day situations, the value of informal learning can be considered high. As a result, information retrieved from informal learning experiences will likely be applicable to daily life. 56 Children with informal learning can at times yield stronger support than subjects with formal learning in the topic of mathematics. 57 Daily life experiences take place in the workforce, family life, and any other situation that may arise during one's lifetime. Informal learning is voluntary from the learner's viewpoint, and may require making mistakes and learning from them. Informal learning allows the individual to discover coping strategies for difficult emotions that may arise while learning. From the learner's perspective, informal learning can become purposeful, because the learner chooses which rate is appropriate to learn, and because this type of learning tends to take place within smaller groups or by oneself. 56. Non-formal learning and combined approaches. The educational system may use a combination of formal, informal, and non-formal learning methods. The UN and EU recognize these different forms of learning, cf. links below. In some schools, students can get points that count in the formal learning systems if they get work done in informal learning circuits. They may be given time to assist international youth workshops and training courses, on the condition they prepare, contribute, share, and can prove this offered valuable new insight, help to acquire new skills, a place to get experience in organizing, teaching, etc. To learn a skill, such as solving a Rubik's Cube quickly, several factors come into play at once. Reading directions helps a player learn the patterns that solve the Rubik's Cube. Practicing the moves repeatedly helps build muscle memory and speed. Thinking critically about moves helps find shortcuts, which speeds future attempts. Observing the Rubik's Cube's 6 colors help anchor solutions in the mind. Revisiting the cube occasionally helps retain the skill. Tangential learning. Tangential learning is the process by which people self-educate if a topic is exposed to them in a context that they already enjoy. For example, after playing a music-based video game, some people may be motivated to learn how to play a real instrument, or after watching a TV show that references Faust and Lovecraft, some people may be inspired to read the original work. 58. Self-education can be improved with systematization. According to experts in natural learning, self-oriented learning training has proven an effective tool for assisting independent learners with the natural phases of learning. 59. Extra Credits writer and game designer James Portnow was the first to suggest games as a potential venue for tangential learning. 60. Moselius et al. 61 points out that intrinsic integration of learning content seems to be a crucial design factor, and that games that include modules for further self-studies tend to present good results. The built-in encyclopedias in the Civilization games are represented as an example. By using these modules, gamers can dig deeper for knowledge about historical events in the gameplay. The importance of rules that regulate learning modules and game experiences discussed by Moreno, c. 62, in a case study about the mobile game Kiwaka. In this game, developed by Lanka in collaboration with ESA and ESO, progress is rewarded with educational content, as opposed to traditional education games where learning activities are rewarded with gameplay. 63-64. Dialogic learning. Dialogic learning is a type of learning based on dialogue. Incidental learning. In incidental teaching, learning is not planned by the instructor or the student, it occurs as a byproduct of another activity, an experience, observation, self-reflection, interaction, unique event, e.g. in response to incidents, accidents, or common routine task. This learning happens in addition to or apart from the instructor's plans and the student's expectations. An example of incidental teaching is when the instructor places a train set on top of a cabinet. If the child points or walks towards the cabinet, the instructor prompts the student to say, train. Once the student says, train, he gets access to the train set. Here are some steps most commonly used in incidental teaching. 65. An instructor will arrange the learning environment so that necessary materials are within the student's sight, but not within his reach, thus impacting his motivation to seek out those materials. An instructor waits for the student to initiate engagement. An instructor prompts the student to respond if needed. An instructor allows access to an item, activity contingent on a correct response from the student. The instructor fades out the prompting process over a period of time and subsequent trials. Incidental learning is an occurrence that is not generally accounted for using the traditional methods of instructional objectives and outcomes assessment. This type of learning occurs in part as a product of social interaction and active involvement in both online and on-site courses. Research implies that some unassessed aspects of on-site and online learning challenge the equivalency of education between the two modalities. Both on-site and online learning have distinct advantages, with traditional on-campus students experiencing higher degrees of incidental learning in 3 times as many areas as online students. Additional research is called for to investigate the implications of these findings both conceptually and pedagogically. 66. Domains. Future School, 1901 or 1910. Benjamin Bloom has suggested 3 domains of learning in his taxonomy, which are cognitive, to recall, calculate, discuss, analyze, problem solve, etc. Psychomotor, to dance, swim, ski, dive, drive a car, ride a bike, etc. Affective, to like something or someone, love, appreciate, fear, hate, worship, etc. These domains are not mutually exclusive. For example, in learning to play chess, the person must learn the rules, cognitive domain, but must also learn how to set up the chess pieces and how to properly hold and move a chess piece, psychomotor. Furthermore, later in the game the person may even learn to love the game itself, value its applications in life, and appreciate its history, affective domain. 67. Transfer. Transfer of learning is the application of skill, knowledge or understanding to resolve a novel problem or situation that happens when certain conditions are fulfilled. Research indicates that learning transfer is infrequent, most common when cued, primed, and guided. 68. And has sought to clarify what it is, and how it might be promoted through instruction. Over the history of its discourse, various hypotheses and definitions have been advanced. First, it is speculated that different types of transfer exist, including near transfer, the application of skill to solve a novel problem in a similar context, and far transfer, the application of skill to solve a novel problem presented in a different context. 69. Furthermore, Perkins and Solomon 1992 suggest that positive transfer in cases when learning supports novel problem solving, and negative transfer occurs when prior learning inhibits performance on highly correlated tasks, such as second or third language learning. 70. Concepts of positive and negative transfer have a long history. Researchers in the early 20th century described the possibility that habits or mental acts developed by a particular kind of training may inhibit rather than facilitate other mental activities. 71. Finally, Schwartz, Bransford and Sears 2005 have proposed that transferring knowledge into a situation may differ from transferring knowledge out to a situation as a means to reconcile findings that transfer may both be frequent and challenging to promote. 72. A significant and long research history has also attempted to explicate the conditions under which transfer of learning might occur. Early research by Ruger, for example, found that the level of attention, attitudes, method of attack, or method for tackling a problem, search for new points of view, careful testing of hypothesis, and generalization were all valuable approaches for promoting transfer. 73. To encourage transfer through teaching, Perkins and Solomon recommend aligning, hugging, instruction with practice and assessment, and bridging, or encouraging learners to reflect on past experiences or make connections between prior knowledge and current content. 70. Factors affecting learning. Genetics. Some aspects of intelligence are inherited genetically, so different learners to some degree have different abilities with regard to learning and speed of learning. Socioeconomic and physical conditions. Problems like malnutrition, fatigue, and poor physical health can slow learning, as can bad ventilation or poor lighting at home, and unhygienic living conditions. 74, 75. The design, quality, and setting of a learning space, such as a school or classroom, can each be critical to the success of a learning environment. Size, configuration, comfort, fresh air, temperature, light, acoustics, furniture, can all affect a student's learning. The tools used by both instructors and students directly affect how information is conveyed, from the display and writing surfaces, blackboards, mockerboards, tack surfaces to digital technologies. For example, if a room is too crowded, stress levels rise, student attention is reduced, and furniture arrangement is restricted. If furniture is incorrectly arranged, sightlines to the instructor or instructional material are limited and the ability to suit the learning or lesson style is restricted. Aesthetics can also play a role, for if student morale suffers, so does motivation to attend school. 76, 77. Psychological factors and teaching style. Intrinsic motivation, such as a student's own intellectual curiosity or desire to experiment or explore, has been found to sustain learning more effectively than extrinsic motivations such as grades or parental requirements. Rote learning involves repetition in order to reinforce facts in memory, but has been criticized as ineffective and drill and kill, since it kills intrinsic motivation. Alternatives to rote learning include active learning and meaningful learning. The speed, accuracy, and retention depend upon aptitude, attitude, interest, attention, energy level, and motivation of the students. Students who answer a question properly or give good results should be praised. This encouragement increases their ability and helps them produce better results. Certain attitudes, such as always finding fault in a student's answer or provoking or embarrassing the student in front of a class, are counterproductive. 78, 79. Certain techniques can increase long-term retention. 80. The spacing effect means that lessons are studying spaced out over time, spaced repetition, are better than cramming. Teaching material to other people. Self-explaining, paraphrasing material to oneself rather than passive reading, low-stakes quizzing. Epigenetic factors. The underlying molecular basis of learning appears to be dynamic changes in gene expression occurring in brain neurons that are introduced. The underlying molecular basis of learning appears to be dynamic changes in gene expression occurring in brain neurons that are introduced by epigenetic mechanisms. Epigenetic regulation of gene expression involves, most notably, chemical modification of DNA or DNA. Epigenetic regulation of gene expression involves, most notably, chemical modification of DNA or DNA-associated histone proteins. These chemical modifications can cause long-lasting changes in gene expression. Epigenetic mechanisms involved in learning include the methylation and demethylation of neuronal DNA as well as methylation, acetylation and distillation of neuronal histone proteins. During learning, information processing in the brain involves induction of oxidative modification in neuronal DNA followed by the employment of DNA repair processes that introduce epigenetic alterations. In particular, the DNA repair processes of non-homologous end joining and base excision repair are employed in learning and memory formation. 81, 82. General cognition-related factors. The nervous system continues to develop during adulthood until brain death. For example, physical exercise has neurobiological effects. The underlying molecular basis of learning appears to be dynamic changes in gene expression occurring in brain neurons that are introduced by epigenetic mechanisms. Epigenetic regulation of gene expression involves, most notably, chemical modification of DNA or DNA-associated histone proteins. These chemical modifications can cause long-lasting changes in gene expression. Epigenetic mechanisms involved in learning include the methylation and demethylation of neuronal DNA as well as methylation, acetylation and distillation of neuronal histone proteins. During learning, information processing in the brain involves induction of oxidative modification in neuronal DNA followed by the employment of DNA repair processes that introduce epigenetic alterations. In particular, the DNA repair processes of non-homologous end joining and base excision repair are employed in learning and memory formation. 81, 82. General cognition-related factors. The nervous system continues to develop during adulthood until brain death. For example, physical exercise has neurobiological effects. The consumption of foods or nutrients, obesity. 83. Alterations of the microbiome, drinks, dietary supplements, recreational drugs and medications. 84, 85 may possibly also have effects on the development of the nervous system. Various diseases, such as COVID-19, have effects on the development of the nervous system. For example, several genes have been identified as being associated with changes in brain structure over lifetime and are potential Alzheimer's disease therapy targets. 86-87 Psychological events such as mental trauma and resilience building. Exposure to environmental pollution and toxins such as air pollution may have effects on the further development of the nervous system. Other activities may also have effects on the development of the nervous system, such as lifelong learning, retraining, and types of media and economic activities. Broadly, brain aging. Adult learning versus children's learning. Learning is often more efficient in children and takes longer or is more difficult with age. A study using neuroimaging identified rapid neurotransmitter GABA boosting as a major potential explanation component for why that is. 88-89. Children's brains contain more silent synapses that are inactive until recruited as part of neuroplasticity and flexible learning or memories. 90-91 Neuroplasticity is heightened during critical or sensitive periods of brain development, mainly referring to brain development during child development. 92. However, researchers, after subjecting late middle-aged participants to university courses, suggest perceived age differences in learning may be a result of differences in time, support, environment, and attitudes, rather than inherent ability. 93. What humans learn at the early stages, and what they learn to apply, sets humans on course for life or has a disproportional impact. 94 Adults usually have a higher capacity to select what they learn, to what extent and how. For example, children may learn the given subjects and topics of school curricula via classroom blackboard transcription handwriting, instead of being able to choose specific topics, skills or jobs to learn in the styles of learning. For instance, children may not have developed consolidated interests, ethics, interest in purpose and meaningful activities, knowledge about real-world requirements and demands, and priorities. In animal evolution, animals gain knowledge in two ways. First is learning, in which an animal gathers information about its environment and uses this information. For example, if an animal eats something that hurts its stomach, it learns not to eat that again. The second is innate knowledge that is genetically inherited. An example of this is when a horse is born and can immediately walk. The horse has not learned this behavior, it simply knows how to do it. 95 In some scenarios, innate knowledge is more beneficial than learned knowledge. However, in other scenarios the opposite is true. Animals must learn certain behaviors when it is disadvantageous to have a specific innate behavior. In these situations, learning evolves in the species. Costs and benefits of learned and innate knowledge. In a changing environment, an animal must constantly gain new information to survive. However, in a stable environment, this same individual needs to gather the information it needs once, and then rely on it for the rest of its life. Therefore, different scenarios better suit either learning or innate knowledge. Essentially, the cost of obtaining certain knowledge versus the benefit of already having it determines whether an animal evolved to learn in a given situation, or whether it innately knew the information. If the cost of gaining the knowledge outweighs the benefit of having it, then the animal does not evolve to learn in this scenario, but instead, non-learning evolves. However, if the benefit of having certain information outweighs the cost of obtaining it, then the animal is far more likely to evolve to have to learn this information. 95. Non-learning is more likely to evolve in two scenarios. If an environment is static and change does not or rarely occurs, then learning is simply unnecessary. Because there is no need for learning in this scenario, and because learning could prove disadvantageous due to the time it took to learn the information, non-learning evolves. Non-learning is more likely to evolve in two scenarios. If an environment is static and change does not or rarely occurs, then learning is simply unnecessary. Because there is no need for learning in this scenario, and because learning could prove disadvantageous due to the time it took to learn the information, non-learning evolves. Similarly, if an environment is in a constant state of change, learning is also disadvantageous, as anything learned is immediately irrelevant because of the changing environment. 95 The learned information no longer applies. Essentially, the animal would be just as successful if it took a guess as if it learned. In this situation, non-learning evolves. In fact, a study of Drosophila melanogaster showed that learning can actually lead to a decrease in productivity, possibly because egg-laying behaviors and decisions were impaired by interference from the memories gained from the newly learned materials or because of the cost of energy in learning. 96. However, in environments where change occurs within an animal's lifetime but is not constant, learning is more likely to evolve. Learning is beneficial in these scenarios because an animal can adapt to the new situation, but can still apply the knowledge that it learns for a somewhat extended period of time. Therefore, learning increases the chances of success as opposed to guessing. 95 An example of this is seen in aquatic environments with landscapes subject to change. In these environments, learning is favored because the fish are predisposed to learn the specific spatial cues where they live. 97. In plants. In recent years, plant physiologists have examined the physiology of plant behavior and cognition. The concepts of learning and memory are relevant in identifying how plants respond to external cues, a behavior necessary for survival. Monica Gagliano, an Australian professor of evolutionary ecology, makes an argument for associative learning in the garden pea, Pisum sativum. The garden pea is not specific to a region, but rather grows in cooler, higher altitude climates. Gagliano and colleagues' 2016 paper aims to differentiate between innate phototropism behavior and learned behaviors. 32 Plants use light cues in various ways, such as to sustain their metabolic needs and to maintain their internal circadian rhythms. Circadian rhythms in plants are modulated by endogenous bioactive substances that encourage leaf opening and leaf closing and are the basis of nyctinastic behaviors. 98. Gagliano and colleagues constructed a classical conditioning test in which pea seedlings were divided into two experimental categories and placed in Y-shaped tubes. 32 In a series of training sessions, the plants were exposed to light coming down different arms of the tube. In each case, there was a fan blowing lightly down the tube in either the same or opposite arm as the light. The unconditioned stimulus, US, was the predicted occurrence of light in the conditioned stimulus, CS. The unconditioned stimulus, US, was The unconditioned stimulus, US, was the predicted occurrence of light in the conditioned stimulus, CS, was the wind blowing by the fan. Previous experimentation shows that plants respond to light by bending and growing towards it through differential cell growth and division on one side of the plant stem mediated by auxin signaling pathways. 99. During the testing phase of Gagliano's experiment, the pea seedlings were placed in different E-pipes and exposed to the fan alone. Their direction of growth was subsequently recorded. The correct response by the seedlings was deemed to be growing into the arm where the light was predicted from the previous day. The majority of plants in both experimental conditions grew in a direction consistent with the predicted location of light based on the position of the fan the previous day. 32. For example, if the seedling was trained with the fan and light coming down the same arm of the Y pipe, the following day the seedling grew towards the fan in the absence of light cues despite the fan being placed in the opposite side of the Y arm. Plants in the control group showed no preference to a particular arm of the Y pipe. The percentage difference in population behavior observed between the control and experimental groups is meant to distinguish innate phototropism behavior from active associative learning. 32. While the physiological mechanism of associative learning in plants is not known, Tulevsky et al. describes a hypothesis that describes photoreception as the basis of mechanoperception in plants. 101 mechanism for mechanoperception in plants relies on MS-ion channels and calcium channels. Mechanosensory proteins in cell lipid bilayers, known as MS-ion channels, are activated once they are physically deformed in response to pressure or tension. Ca2+ permeable ion channels are stretch-gated and allow for the influx of osmolytes and calcium, a well-known second messenger, into the cell. This ion influx triggers a passive flow of water into the cell down its osmotic gradient, effectively increasing turbopressure and causing the cell to depolarize. 100 Galliano hypothesizes that the basis of associative learning in Pisum sativum is the coupling of mechanosensory and photosensory pathways and is mediated by auxin signaling pathways. The result is directional growth to maximize a plant's capture of sunlight. The result is directional growth to maximize a plant's capture of sunlight. 32. Gagliano et al. Published another paper on habituation behaviors in the Mimosa pudica plant whereby the innate behavior of the plant was diminished by repeated exposure to a stimulus. 18. There has been controversy around this paper and more generally around the topic of plant cognition. Charles Abramson, a psychologist and behavioral biologist, says that part of the issue of why scientists disagree about whether plants have the ability to learn is that researchers do not use a consistent definition of learning and cognition. 101. Similarly, Michael Pollan, an author and journalist, says in his piece The Intelligent Plant that researchers do not doubt Gagliano's data but rather her language, specifically her use of the term learning and cognition with respect to plants. 102. A direction for future research is testing whether circadian rhythms in plants modulate learning and behavior and surveying researchers' definitions of cognition and learning. Machine learning. Robots can learn to cooperate. Machine learning, a branch of artificial intelligence, concerns the construction and study of systems that can learn from data. For example, a machine learning system could be trained on email messages to learn to distinguish between spam and non-spam messages. Most of the machine learning models are based on probabilistic theories where each input, e.g. an image, is associated with a probability to become the desired output. Behavior. Behavior, American English, or behavior, British English, is the range of actions and mannerisms made by individuals, organisms, systems or artificial entities in some environment. These systems can include other systems or organisms as well as the Behavior, American English, or behavior, British English, is the range of actions and mannerisms made by individuals, organisms, systems or artificial entities in some environment. These systems can include other systems or organisms as well as the inanimate physical environment. It is the computed response of the system or organism to various stimuli or inputs, whether internal or external, conscious or subconscious, overt or covert, and voluntary or involuntary. 1. Taking a behavior informatics perspective, a behavior consists of actor, operation, interactions, and their properties. This can be represented as a behavior vector. 2. Models. Biology. Although disagreement exists as to how to precisely define behavior in a biological context, one common interpretation based on a meta-analysis of scientific literature states that behavior is the internally coordinated responses, actions or inactions of whole living organisms, individuals or groups to internal or external stimuli. 3. A broader definition of behavior, applicable to plants and other organisms, is similar to the concept of phenotypic plasticity. It describes behavior as a response to an event or environment change during the course of the lifetime of an individual, differing from other physiological or biochemical changes that occur more rapidly, and excluding changes that are a result of development, ontogeny. 4. 5. Behaviors can be either innate or learned from the environment. 6. Behavior can be regarded as any action of an organism that changes its relationship to its environment. Behavior provides outputs from the organism to the environment. 7. Human behavior. The endocrine system and the nervous system likely influence human behavior. Complexity in the behavior of an organism may be correlated to the complexity of its nervous system. Generally, organisms with more complex nervous systems have a greater capacity to learn new responses and thus adjust their behavior. 8. Animal behavior. Ethology is the scientific and objective study of animal behavior, usually with a focus on behavior under natural conditions, and viewing behavior as an evolutionarily adaptive trait. 9th, behaviorism is a term that also describes the scientific and objective study of animal behavior, usually referring to measured responses to stimuli or trained behavioral responses in a laboratory context, without a particular emphasis on evolutionary adaptivity. 10. Consumer behavior. Consumers' behavior. Consumer behavior involves the processes consumers go through, and reactions they have towards Consumer behavior involves the processes consumers go through, and reactions they have towards products or services. 11. It has to do with consumption, and the processes consumers go through around purchasing and consuming goods and services. 12. Consumers recognize needs or wants, and go through a process to satisfy these needs. Consumer behavior is the process they go through as customers, which includes types of products purchased, amount spent, frequency of purchases and what influences them to make the purchase decision or not. Circumstances that influence consumer behavior are varied, with contributions from both internal and external factors. 12. Internal factors include attitudes, needs, motives, preferences and perceptual processes, whilst external factors include marketing activities, social and economic factors, and cultural aspects. 12. Dr. Lars Perner of the University of Southern California claims that there are also physical factors that influence consumer behavior. For example, if a consumer is hungry, then this physical feeling of hunger will influence them so that they go and purchase a sandwich to satisfy the hunger. 13. Consumer decision-making. Lars Perner presents a model that outlines the decision-making process involved in consumer behavior. The process initiates with the identification of a problem, wherein the consumer acknowledges an unsatisfied need or desire. Subsequently, the consumer proceeds to seek information, whereas for low-involvement products, the search tends to rely on internal resources, retrieving alternatives from memory. Conversely, for high-involvement products, the search is typically more extensive, involving activities like reviewing reports, reading reviews, or seeking recommendations from friends. The consumer will then evaluate his or her alternatives, comparing price and quality, doing trade-offs between products, and narrowing down the choice by eliminating the less appealing products until there is one left. After this has been identified, the consumer will purchase the product. Finally, the consumer will evaluate the purchase decision and the purchased product, bringing in factors such as value for money, quality of goods, and purchase experience.